I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
Heavy oak doors slammed shut inside Clarence House this morning as royal protection officers changed the locks on Queen Camilla's private estate. The dramatic takeover follows a night of explosive, closed-door testimony that completely dismantled the remaining defenses of the Queen's administrative faction, with key officials turning whistleblower and financial records pointing directly to systemic abuse of power. Prince William has taken decisive physical control of the disputed property. The monarchy has entered uncharted territory, where the traditional protections of the crown are giving way to immediate, forceful accountability. The midnight takeover, heavy oak doors slammed shut inside Clarence House. Royal protection officers stepped into the grand foyer in single file. They carried thick metal clipboards and digital key encoders. Sergeant Miller walked straight to the main security desk. He placed his official warrant on the polished wood. He told the night watchman to hand over the master keys to the residential wing immediately. The watchman looked at the badge on Miller's chest. He did not argue. He reached into the drawer and pulled out the heavy leather ring holding every brass key in the building. The facts are that Clarence House serves as the private residence of Queen Camilla. It operates under a separate administrative bubble from Buckingham Palace, managed by a distinct team of personal staff. While the Prince of Wales holds executive oversight of the broader estate properties through his duchy portfolio, entering a senior royal's private home requires an extraordinary legal authorization. That authorization had been signed by the Home Secretary less than an hour earlier, following the catastrophic disclosures from the parliamentary inquiry. Tension filled the quiet corridor as Prince William walked through the front entrance. He wore a dark wool overcoat and carried a slim leather folio under his arm. He did not look at the portraits hanging along the walls. He walked directly toward the Queen's private study on the second floor. Two protection officers flanked him closely, their hands resting near their service belts. The household staff stood in small groups near the doorways, watching the proceedings in absolute silence. Nobody dared to ask a question. The facts were that the Prince of Wales had invoked a historic crown prerogative instrument dating back to the 19th century. This emergency legal mechanism allows the direct heir to take immediate physical possession of any royal residential property if there is credible evidence of administrative sabotage or financial fraud originating from within its walls. The warrants had bypassed the usual palace clearance protocols, catching the Queen's private advisors completely off guard. The mystery was how the prince's legal team had managed to secure the emergency warrant in the middle of the night without tipping off the Queen's personal lawyers. Normally, high-level estate disputes require weeks of arbitration through the Privy Council and formal hearings before the Lord Chancellor. Yet, the paperwork had been processed and stamped by dawn. The mystery resolved when William's chief legal counsel stepped out of the study and handed the prince a signed affidavit. The document bore the fingerprint and formal testimony of the Queen's former chief accountant. He had cracked under interrogation at Scotland Yard 3 hours prior. He confessed that the master encryption keys for the estate's hidden offshore accounts were physically stored inside a wall safe in Camilla's private study. He provided the exact numerical combination to open it. The facts were that the safe contained not just digital flash drives, but original paper deeds and unrecorded property transfers signed by unauthorized staff members. These documents proved that millions of pounds in estate revenue had been systematically diverted away from public maintenance funds and funneled into private portfolios controlled by the Queen's inner circle. The physical proof was sitting behind a panel less than 20 feet away from where William was standing. A new mystery opened as William approached the mahogany bookshelf on the far side of the study. He pushed against the carved wooden frame. The shelf swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing a shallow wall cavity. The cavity was completely empty. The safe door stood wide open. The hinges were still warm to the touch. Someone had cleared out the contents less than 10 minutes before the royal protection officers crossed the threshold. William stared into the dark opening. He turned around and looked at the guards stationed by the door. He asked who had entered the private wing since midnight. The watchman stepped forward and stammered that only the Queen's personal secretary had passed through the foyer, carrying a small leather case just before the police sirens were heard outside. The secretary had left through the garden exit toward the mews. The hunt was far from over. The physical evidence had been moved once again, but the net was closing rapidly around the remaining conspirators. William placed the leather folio on the desk. He instructed his team to seal every exit and lock down all communications from the property. The midnight takeover had succeeded in securing the building, but the missing documents were now somewhere out in the city. The race to recover them before they could be destroyed had entered its most dangerous phase. The explosive testimony. A heavy metal door clicked shut in the basement of Scotland Yard. Detective Inspector Vance dropped a thick audio cassette onto the metal interview table. The tape recorder sat in the center with its red recording light blinking steadily. Across the table sat the Queen's former chief accountant. He stared down at his clasped hands. His fingers twitched against his knuckles. He did not look up when Vance pulled out a yellow legal pad and clicked his ballpoint pen. The facts are that white-collar criminal investigations inside royal households rely heavily on insider cooperation to pierce layers of administrative privilege. When financial ledgers are routed through complex offshore trusts, standard forensic audits take months to untangle. An immediate confession from a principal accountant bypasses weeks of subpoena delays. His testimony provides the direct link between unauthorized asset diversion and the individuals who authorized the transactions from inside Clarence House. Tension filled the small room as Vance pressed play on the portable tape player. The low hiss of magnetic tape filled the air, followed by the recorded voice of the accountant recorded 4 hours earlier. The audio detailed how millions of pounds in estate surplus funds were systematically redirected into private shell accounts. The voice on the tape sounded tired and resigned. It named Queen Camilla's personal secretary as the primary architect of the financial diversion scheme. The facts were that the accountant had kept personal duplicate logs of every unauthorized transfer. He stored these records in a locked filing cabinet inside his office at Clarence House as an insurance policy against his own liability. When the recent palace fire destroyed the physical archives in the East Annex, he realized his personal copies were the last surviving proof of the entire operation. He decided to turn them over to the police before the investigative net tightened completely around him. The mystery was why the accountant had waited until the middle of the night to walk into a central London police station with his evidence. His office at Clarence House had remained accessible during the entire morning after the fire. He could have walked out with the files at any hour without drawing suspicion from the night watchman. The mystery resolved when Vance asked him about the timing on the record. The accountant explained that he had received a direct phone call from the Queen's private secretary at 2 a.m. The secretary ordered him to pack up the remaining files in the basement vault and burn them immediately in the estate incinerator. The demand made it clear that the inner circle intended to make him take the full legal blame for the missing millions. Fearing for his freedom, he grabbed the files, walked out the side gate, and flagged down a passing cab straight to Scotland Yard. The facts were that his testimony provided the exact legal foundation needed to secure emergency search warrants for Clarence House. The sequence of events matched the timeline of Prince William's midnight takeover. The police had the confession, the paper trail, and the insider accounts pointing directly to the private study on the second floor. A new mystery opened as Vance paused the cassette tape. He slid a single photograph across the metal table toward the accountant. The photo showed a signature on a bank transfer form dated 3 years ago. Vance asked if he recognized the handwriting. The accountant stared at the ink lines. He confirmed it belonged to a senior legal advisor who worked directly for the sovereign's private office. The plot went much deeper than just the administrative staff at Clarence House. The financial extraction network reached into the core legal machinery of the entire royal establishment. The accountant whispered that the advisor had personally approved the loophole used to bypass parliamentary oversight. That same advisor was currently sitting inside a secure conference room at Buckingham Palace, attending an emergency strategy meeting with senior government lawyers. Vance picked up his desk phone. He instructed the raid team stationed outside the conference room to detain the legal advisor immediately. The testimony had blown the lid off the entire operation. Every person involved in the cover-up was scrambling to protect themselves, but the evidence was moving faster than their ability to hide it. The testimony was locked on tape, and the fallout was about to hit the highest levels of the monarchy. The mansion's hidden ledger. A heavy brass key turned twice in the lock of the mahogany wall cabinet. Detective Inspector Vance pulled the glass door open with a soft creak. He reached inside the top shelf and lifted a black leather binder. The cover was worn at the corners. The gold lettering on the spine had faded away entirely. He set the binder down on the polished study desk. The green blotter beneath it collected a fine layer of dust. He flipped the cover open to the first page. The facts are that private estates maintained by senior members of the royal family often contain auxiliary studies used for personal correspondence and estate management. These rooms are strictly exempt from standard civil inspections under ancient property privileges. When police execute a judicially approved warrant following an insider confession, every locked cabinet, desk drawer, and wall compartment becomes fair game for forensic examination. The black leather binder was cataloged as exhibit number 42. Tension filled the quiet study as Vance switched on the adjustable desk lamp. The warm light illuminated columns of handwritten numbers and dates spanning 3 separate decades. He turned to a page dated in the year 2018. The entries listed large monetary transfers routed through accounts in the Cayman Islands. Next to each figure were initials written in black ink. The initials matched the personal monogram used by Queen Camilla's private secretary. The facts were that these handwritten entries did not match the official accounting ledgers submitted to the Privy Purse Office. They represented a parallel bookkeeping system designed to track funds that bypass state oversight completely. The properties listed in the margins included rural manors, London townhouses, and offshore commercial investments bought using surplus royal grants. The mystery was why the principal accountant had left this specific master ledger inside an unsecured cabinet in the secondary study, instead of burning it with the other documents. A man trying to cover his tracks would normally destroy the primary evidence first. Leaving the master book behind defied all logic for someone trained in corporate embezzlement. The mystery resolved when Vance discovered a hidden pocket glued to the inside back cover of the binder. He used a pair of metal tweezers to pull out a folded note written on royal stationery. The note was dated 3 days ago. It was an instruction from the Queen's private secretary, ordering the accountant to keep the master ledger intact as a safeguard against any government betrayal. The secretary had planned to use the book as leverage against the senior household officials if the financial audit ever threatened to expose them. The facts were that the safeguard plan backfired spectacularly. By keeping the master ledger intact, the conspirators left an unbroken paper trail directly to their doorstep. The police did not have to guess where the money went or who authorized the movements. Every single transaction was written down in clear, legible handwriting with corresponding bank routing codes. A new mystery opened as Vance turned to the final 2 pages of the binder. The pages had been cleanly torn out of the binding using a sharp blade. Only jagged strips of thick paper remained attached to the spine. Who had removed those specific pages before the police arrived at the estate? Vance examined the torn edges under a magnifying glass. The paper fibers were fresh. The pages had been ripped out within the last 12 hours. That meant someone had gained access to the study after the accountant walked into Scotland Yard, but before Prince William's protection officers secured the building at midnight. The inspector picked up his radio and called the front foyer team. He asked if any staff member had entered the second-floor study during the evening shift. The officer on the other end confirmed that a junior archivist had been seen leaving the West Corridor carrying a flat leather folder around 11 o'clock. The archivist claimed he was retrieving personal correspondence for the Queen's household manager. The net was tightening around the final operatives. The torn pages likely contained the names of external consultants and government officials who had accepted payoffs to look the other way during annual audits. Vance instructed his team to track down the archivist immediately before he could board a flight out of the country. He closed the black leather binder and slid it into a heavy plastic evidence bag. The mansion's hidden ledger had yielded enough actionable proof to dismantle the entire administrative network. The physical evidence was secured. The paper trail was complete. The investigation was moving out of the archives and into the final phase of arrests. Camilla's isolation. A heavy silver telephone sat on the corner of the small writing desk in Queen Camilla's private sitting room. The red indicator light flashed in a slow, rhythmic pulse. The screen displayed 20 missed calls from the palace switchboard. Camilla stood by the tall sash window. She looked out into the courtyard below. 3 police vans were parked across the gravel drive. Their blue emergency lights cast long, spinning shadows against the white stone pillars of the entrance. The facts are that Clarence House operates as an autonomous household with a dedicated staff appointed directly by the Queen. When a high-profile police raid occurs and federal warrants are executed, standard protocols require the household to isolate its principal resident to prevent any interference with ongoing legal procedures. The internal communications network is immediately restricted to prevent outside coordination. Camilla was entirely cut off from the outer administrative offices within minutes of the midnight takeover. Tension filled the quiet room as the telephone started ringing again. The sharp digital chime echoed off the high ceiling. Camilla did not turn around from the window. She watched a royal protection officer walk across the courtyard, carrying a cardboard box filled with seized office files. Her private secretary did not answer the call from the desk. He was already sitting in the back of a Metropolitan Police transport vehicle parked near the gate. The facts were that her inner circle of advisors and legal counsels had collapsed in less than 6 hours. The network of loyalists who had managed her private schedules, public engagements, and estate accounts had either been arrested, fled the country, or turned state witness. The administrative shield that protected her private office for over a decade had vanished completely. The mystery was why none of the senior cabinet ministers she had called earlier that evening answered her direct line. She had placed 4 emergency calls to political allies in Whitehall between midnight and 2 in the morning. Every single number went straight to voicemail or returned an automated out-of-service message. Her former political allies were abandoning her to save their own careers. The mystery resolved when a television screen mounted in the corner of the hallway flicked on automatically. The morning news broadcast was playing live footage of the parliamentary inquiry session. The Prime Minister stood at the dispatch box in the House of Commons. He announced that all executive exemptions for private royal estates had been suspended indefinitely pending a full criminal audit. He stated clearly that no individual, regardless of rank or title, stood above the rule of law. The facts were that the government had severed all political protection for the household. The traditional shield of quiet diplomatic resolution was gone. The scandal was out in the open, broadcast on every channel across the nation. The Queen's political capital was completely exhausted. A new mystery opened as a soft knock sounded on the heavy double doors of her sitting room. Camilla turned slowly away from the window. The door swung open an inch. A junior housekeeper stood in the gap, holding a plain white envelope on a silver tray. The housekeeper kept her eyes fixed on the floor. She did not raise her head to look at the Queen. She whispered that the envelope had been handed to the ground floor guard by an unknown courier standing outside the perimeter fence. Camilla walked across the carpet and picked up the envelope from the tray. The housekeeper stepped back into the corridor and pulled the heavy door shut without a word. Camilla broke the paper seal with her thumb. She unfolded a single sheet of heavy white cardstock inside. There was no formal letterhead. There were only 2 typed sentences printed in the center of the page. The note stated that the remaining offshore accounts in Geneva had been frozen by Swiss federal prosecutors 10 minutes ago. It concluded with a stark warning that the final asset forfeiture hearings would begin at the High Court before the end of the week. There was no signature at the bottom. The anonymous message was a final confirmation that the financial empire built over decades had been completely dismantled. Camilla walked back to her desk and dropped the note onto the blotter next to the flashing telephone. She sat down in her high-backed leather chair. The room was utterly silent except for the low hum of the television report in the hall. The isolation was complete. The doors were locked from the outside, the staff was gone, and the records were in police custody. The final chapter of her tenure as queen was closing under the cold weight of absolute accountability. The legal siege. 2 bailiffs in dark wool suits walked up the gravel path of Clarence House. They carried heavy leather briefcases and thick manila envelopes stamped with the red seal of the High Court of Justice. A royal protection officer stepped out from the portico and blocked their path. He told them they could not proceed past the outer gate without explicit clearance from the Lord Chamberlain's office. The lead bailiff did not blink. He pulled a single folded document from his breast pocket and tapped it against his palm. He said the court order superseded all internal royal privileges. The facts are that the High Court holds the ultimate civil jurisdiction over asset forfeiture and property seizures across the United Kingdom, even when those properties sit within royal land boundaries. When criminal investigations uncover systemic financial fraud and unauthorized fund diversion, government solicitors can petition the courts for immediate civil recovery orders. These orders grant court-appointed bailiffs the legal authority to enter private residential estates, inventory physical assets, and place formal liens on real estate holdings to secure public restitution. Tension filled the courtyard as the protection officer radioed the control desk for instructions. The radio hissed with static for 30 seconds before a voice barked back an order to stand down. The officer lowered his arm and stepped aside. The bailiffs walked past him and mounted the stone steps toward the main entrance. The heavy oak doors swung open from the inside, revealing 2 government solicitors waiting in the foyer with clipboards ready to begin the formal inventory. The facts were that the legal siege was designed to secure every physical and financial asset tied to the Queen's private administrative network. The court order authorized the immediate seizure of bank accounts, registered vehicles, valuable art collections, and physical property deeds held within Clarence House. Every item listed in the black leather master ledger was now subject to immediate state impoundment pending final forfeiture hearings. The mystery was how the legal team had managed to compile a comprehensive inventory of assets located inside a private royal residence within 24 hours of the initial police raid. Normally, cataloging the contents of a historic estate requires weeks of detailed surveying by independent appraisers and estate historians. The mystery resolved when the lead solicitor opened his briefcase and displayed a digital tablet linked directly to the Metropolitan Police database. The principal accountant who confessed at Scotland Yard had provided a complete room-by-room inventory list of every high-value item purchased with diverted funds over the last 10 years. He had even noted where specific luxury art pieces and imported furniture sets were positioned throughout the rooms. The facts were that the inventory matched the physical reality inside the mansion, down to the exact placement of cataloged items. The bailiffs walked into the grand drawing room and immediately placed bright yellow evidence tags on 3 19th century oil paintings and a carved mahogany sideboard. Each tagged item represented a specific financial transaction, traced back to the unauthorized offshore shell accounts. A new mystery opened as one of the bailiffs knelt down beside a heavy iron floor safe hidden beneath a Persian rug in the corner of the library. The safe was not listed in the accountant's master ledger. It was a secondary unit installed after the last official estate renovation 2 years ago. The dial was locked tight. Who had installed the hidden safe, and what remaining documents were sealed inside its heavy steel door? The solicitor signaled for a certified locksmith waiting outside in the transport van. The locksmith walked into the library carrying a heavy metal case filled with drilling tools and digital diagnostic scanners. He knelt down beside the safe and pressed a fiber optic camera against the dial mechanism. The small screen on his diagnostic tool lit up with a faint blue glow. The locksmith began punching codes into his keypad, while the bailiffs stood guard at the double doors. The legal siege was no longer just about recovering known assets. It was probing into the deepest financial bolt holes left behind by the collapsing administration. Every turn of the drill brought the investigators closer to uncovering the ultimate source of the corruption. The drill bit whined against the reinforced steel door of the floor safe. A fine spray of gray metallic dust settled over the dark wool of the locksmith's trousers. He paused every 30 seconds to check the digital diagnostic screen mounted on his belt. The inner tumblers were beginning to shift under the pressure of the automated torque wrench. The room remained completely silent, except for the mechanical grinding echoing against the tall bookcases. The fact is that secondary floor safes installed within private residential wings of royal properties are often excluded from standard architectural blueprints to protect sensitive personal correspondence. However, when a formal civil forfeiture order is executed by the High Court, investigators possess the legal mandate to bypass all internal privacy barriers. Any hidden compartment discovered during the execution of the warrant becomes subject to immediate forensic drilling and inventory seizure. Tension mounted in the library as the torque wrench gave a sharp, metallic click. The heavy steel door popped open an inch against the pressure of the floorboards. The locksmith stepped back and wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. He motioned for the lead bailiff to approach the open vault. The bailiff stepped forward, knelt beside the metal frame, and pulled the heavy door all the way open. The mystery was what the safe had been protecting since it was installed 2 years ago. The black leather master ledger had already been recovered from the desk cabinet, and the primary offshore accounts had been frozen by Swiss banking authorities. Yet, whoever installed this secondary vault had gone to extraordinary lengths to keep its contents isolated from the rest of the household records. The mystery resolved when the bailiff reached inside the dark interior and pulled out a heavy velvet pouch tied with a gold silk cord. He untied the cord and tipped the contents onto the green blotter of the study table. A dozen diamond-encrusted brooches and 3 solid gold pocket watches tumbled out onto the cloth, catching the light of the desk lamp. Beneath the jewelry lay a thick stack of uncashed bearer bonds issued by an international development bank. The facts were that these luxury items and financial instruments represented physical capital converted directly from public estate grants over the past decade. They were liquid assets designed to be easily transported out of the country in the event of a sudden administrative collapse. The conspirators had been hoarding portable wealth inside the hidden floor safe as an emergency evacuation fund. A new mystery opened as one of the solicitors picked up the topmost bearer bond and read the serial number aloud. The bond was registered not to the Queen's private estate, but to a defunct shell corporation that had been dissolved by the Department of Trade and Industry back in 2015. How did active financial instruments continue to flow through a dissolved corporate entity for over 10 years without triggering a single automated alert from the national banking system? The locksmith leaned over the table to inspect the paper stock of the bonds. He pointed out a small embossed watermark in the corner of the sheet. It was the official seal of the Privy Purse Administrative Office. The corruption was not merely operating adjacent to the royal household. It was being generated from within the very heart of the state's financial machinery. The bailiff placed all the recovered items into a padded aluminum transport case and locked the heavy lid with a brass padlock. He picked up his pen and signed the formal seizure log, adding the hidden floor safe and its contents to the official court record. The legal siege was yielding more than just paperwork. It was exposing the physical loot of a decades-long embezzlement scheme. The solicitor walked to the tall window of the library and looked out across the gravel driveway. The police vans were still stationed at the gates, their blue lights turning in slow circles against the gray afternoon sky. The net was fully cast, and every avenue of escape had been systematically sealed off. The legal process was moving forward with unstoppable momentum, carrying the full weight of the British justice system directly into the final chambers of the palace. The Crown at a crossroads. King Charles sat in his private study at Windsor Castle. He held a silver fountain pen above a crisp sheet of parchment paper. The morning sun cut through the tall Gothic window. It cast a sharp diagonal line across the Persian rug on the floor. His hand rested motionless on the dark wood of the desk. Outside the window, a lone gardener pushed a heavy wheelbarrow across the damp lawn. The castle was quiet, but the silence felt thin and fragile. The facts are that the reigning monarch holds ultimate constitutional responsibility for the moral integrity and public trust of the royal institution. When a major financial scandal implicates senior members of the household and triggers civil asset seizures at residential properties like Clarence House, the sovereign cannot remain a passive observer. While constitutional convention insulates the monarch from direct legal prosecution, public expectations demand decisive ethical leadership during institutional crises. The king faced a choice between defending his family circle or safeguarding the survival of the crown. Tension filled the quiet room as the private secretary stepped across the threshold. He did not knock. He carried a red ministerial box containing the latest dispatches from Downing Street and the High Court. He placed the heavy box on the edge of the desk with a dull thud. He told the king that the Prime Minister was waiting on the secure line for a final response regarding the restructuring of the royal household finances. Charles did not look up immediately. He stared at the silver cap of his pen. The facts were that the proposed restructuring would strip the private offices of all independent financial autonomy. Every pound generated through estate revenues, duchy surpluses, and royal grants would be subjected to direct parliamentary auditing and public transparency rules. The administrative independence that the royal household had enjoyed for centuries was coming to an end. The crown was being forced into a new era of fiscal accountability under state supervision. The mystery was why the king had delayed issuing a public statement condemning the actions of the arrested administrative staff for nearly 48 hours after the initial police raid. Every major newspaper in London had published scathing editorials questioning his silence on the matter. Critics wondered if the sovereign was secretly trying to shield his inner circle from the full weight of the criminal code. The mystery resolved when Charles finally picked up his pen and began to write his personal reply to the Prime Minister. He did not write a defense of his staff. he wrote a formal authorization endorsing the full scope of the parliamentary inquiry. He stated that the Crown welcomed the independent audit and waived all remaining royal exemptions for the properties under investigation. He chose the survival of the institution over the protection of corrupted individuals. The facts were that this executive decision marked a fundamental turning point in modern British constitutional history. By willingly surrendering ancient financial privileges, the monarch set a new legal precedent. The Crown was officially submitting to the same standards of transparency that governed ordinary public institutions. The era of untouchable palace discretion was over. A new mystery opened as the secretary pointed out a single unaddressed envelope resting at the very bottom of the red ministerial box. The envelope bore no official seal or postage stamp. It had been delivered directly to the Windsor Gatehouse by an unknown courier 10 minutes before the briefing. Charles picked it up and broke the wax seal with his thumb. He pulled out a single photograph and a handwritten note. The photograph showed Queen Camilla standing outside a private residence in the Scottish Highlands, accompanied by 2 federal investigators. The note stated that she had voluntarily agreed to surrender her remaining private estates to the High Court receivership to settle all outstanding financial liabilities. The surrender was complete. There was nothing left to protect and nowhere left to hide. Charles placed the photograph face down on the desk. He closed the red box and pushed it toward his secretary. He told him to transmit the signed authorization to Downing Street immediately. He stood up from his chair and walked slowly to the window. He looked out at the vast expanse of the castle grounds. The storm had broken over the monarchy, and the foundations had held. The institution had survived the crisis, but it would never be the same again. The storm over Clarence House has finally settled, leaving the ancient monarchy forever changed. What began as a midnight fire in a modest service wing exposed a web of hidden ledgers, asset seizures, and systemic corruption at the highest levels. With Prince William taking decisive physical control and Parliament enforcing absolute accountability, the era of untouchable palace privilege has officially come to an end. The Crown survived its ultimate test, proving that transparency must always outweigh tradition.